All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Garrett Byrd. Thrilled to be your host today. So, we're diving into a topic that might seem surprising: why you shouldn't get into self storage development. We're excited to have Marc Goodin, CEO of Storage Authority, with us today. Now, he owns multiple facilities. He's found land for, he designed them, he manages them, he still owns them today. Marc, I know you helped endless amount of owners get into self storage as well. But can you share with the audience how you got started in self storage and the fruition of Storage Authority?
Absolutely. By trade, I'm a civil engineer. And so when I was working at my engineering firm, actually, it wasn't mine back in the 80s, somebody came into the office and they wanted a self-storage design. So in 1984, I designed my first self-storage. After designing many more, in 2006, I built my first self-storage in Connecticut. 2008, I built my second one. And ever since then, I've been helping clients with self-storage. Then back a few years ago, an acquaintance, well, not even an acquaintance, a total stranger, Scott House gave me a call out of the blue. He took all the courses out there that was done. He went to the courses, he bought the books, he read everything online, and he gave me a call and he says, Marc, will you help me day by day to get this to happen, because he just felt he needed that assistance. And after a couple of weeks, he said, Marc, why don't we make this into a franchise? What you're teaching me, you can teach the next guy. And that's exactly what we did. We created Storage Authority. It's a great system to help the people that just don't have that knowledge in their back pocket.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing, Marc. And over the years, self storage has become one of the most resilient, profitable, and attractive real estate asset classes out there. Yet, despite its record, it's not the right business for everyone. So today, we're going to learn, the 7 common reasons individuals choose not to pursue self storage development. So we'll share some context. Hopefully it helps clarify those concerns, and either valid or invalidate them, and hopefully you can overcome some of those concerns. Quick big thank you to today's sponsor, StoreTrack. When it comes to market data for our self-storage industry, StoreTrack is the gold standard for developers, investors, operators. So big appreciation to StoreTrack. And before we jump in, I do want to hear from our audience. If you had to guess the top 7 reasons people don't pursue self-storage development, what would it be? What's your top 7? If you can throw that in the chat, we'll appreciate that. We'll cover them as we get rolling. So we'll get started. Marc, what's one of the number one or top 7 issues that people have concerns with getting into self storage development?
Garrett, great. Often the number one reason people don't get into self-storage is because building and owning a business involves decision making, paperwork, oversight, managing staff, and accountability. For individuals that are satisfied with their current financial position and lifestyle, taking on a new venture may not be appealing. Now, my personality is different. I believe I'm financially secure and I enjoy my lifestyle, but I've always got to have something to do. So I'll always be looking towards that next self-storage. Some people don't want to be a boss and take on the responsibility that it requires.
That definitely makes sense, Marc. I mean, ownership isn't just a title; it's a job. So, what's the next big hurdle then that you see?
Well, often the second hurdle is people don't believe they have time, and we've all heard it. Everyone has the same 24 hours in a day. The difference is how willing is someone to redirect a portion of that time toward building something new that in the end will give them a new lifestyle that they probably won't even believe 5 to 10 years down the road. During the development and lease up phase, self storage requires focused involvement, particularly around finding land, design, development, construction, and early operations. While systems and partners or third-party management can reduce the workload, they do not eliminate the need for owner involvement. Those unwilling to invest the time up front are unlikely to succeed. Once you open up, fill the facility up and have a detailed system and plan, you've typically earned absentee ownership and will have earned a 4-hour work week. So it goes from 8 hours a week to 4 hours a week. You've got to have some time, no matter what business it is, but self-storage takes the least amount of time compared to any other business that I know. So if you're not willing for that 8 hours or 4 hours, self-storage is probably not for you, at least self-storage development.
That makes sense. So say someone can find those 8 hours, those 8 hours a week, they still have to face their own backyard. So I'm always hearing my market's already full or it won't work here. So what do you say to that, Mark?
Well, that's the number three or top seven is, people don't believe self-storage will work in their market. Um, self-storage performance is highly location specific. It can thrive on one side of town and struggle on the other side of town due to factors such as population, density, housing turnover, traffic patterns, visibility, competition, and rental rates. So skepticism is healthy, but assumptions without data is very risky. I heard one person say, it's impossible now, or in this state, it's impossible. And then the very next person that comes to Storage Authority, they are very successful in the exact same location. So, it does work. You just got to be willing to look in the micro markets to find that one location that will work for you. The great news is, you don't have to buy a piece of land until you find the one that works for you. So there is no risk because you're not going to buy it until it works.
Makes sense. I know we have that philosophy internally. 103-1. Let's look at 100 properties, make 3 offers, close on one. It's about that consistency. All right, that leads us to what's the number four that you're seeing out there?
Well, fear of failure holds people back. Entrepreneurship is not for everyone. Only a small percentage of the people are naturally comfortable with risk, ambiguity, especially with large capital investments are involved. Fear is not the issue, it's unmanaged fear is the issue. Education, planning, and commitment to consistent execution significantly reduces the risk, you know. And then to start with, self-storage has the least risk of any real estate business. But however, if fear prevents action altogether, development of any kind will remain out of reach. Um, when I built my first self-storage, I asked my best friend, "Hey, you want to be my partner?" He says, "No, no, that's too risky. I'll do it on your second one." Well, when I built my second one, I asked my friend the exact same question. "Well, you want to come on board? I've got everything down now. It was very successful in the first one. This one's going to be more successful." He couldn't come over that fear. So, it's just entrepreneurship is not for everybody. And so you've got to make that decision. But you have to remember no business is going to grow well and fast on its own. It takes a team.
Agreed. And there's very few businesses out there where you can combine the real estate backbone of self storage and then you run it like a first class business. It just supersizes the whole program. To everybody in the audience, I do want to throw up a poll. If we'll get to it towards the end, but if you don't mind adding in, go ahead and voting, and we'll get to that at the end. So I appreciate the engagement. But speaking of big stakes, Mark, let's talk about the elephant in the room. I'm reading some of the chat comments. What's the next big concern that you see out there?
People don't have enough capital, or they don't believe they have enough capital. Self-storage development capital varies and increases with the size and income potential of the facility. A large project is capable of producing substantial cash and will require significant equity, often combined with lenders' financing. Um, that said, many developments are structured with partners to spread the financial and time commitments and risk commitments. We have partners at Storage Authority, franchise owners that is the team of husband and wife. We have them where it's two different guys teamed up. We have it all the way from two different guys all the way up to four to make a partnership to have that capital. And we actually have one that's built with two guys. One has zero money, who's doing all the work, 100% of the work, and the other one is a friend and an investor that's putting the money up. So there's a lot of different opportunities. If you're going to build around 60 to 80,000 for a healthy six-figure income and a large retirement egg, you're going to need around $1.5 million with an SBA loan of 15% down. I'm not saying everybody has to go that route, but that's the route that's going to get you to multi-millionaire in 5 years. You can buy a self-storage for $250,000. It's a small self-storage. It's going to be a small side income. But we're generally talking about an income that is large enough for you to retire, as soon as you get it full, 5 to 6 years down the road from now.
Yeah, and believe it or not, the SBA loan products only came available to self storage, shoot, 10 or 15 years ago. So it used to be no matter what, you needed the 30% down plus. So it's been a great loan product for individuals looking to get into self storage. So obviously the creative financing, the SBA loan products, that bridges one gap. What's the next one that you're seeing that's really a big concern to owners?
Yeah, and I can't emphasize enough, backtracking to what you said there, Garrett. SBA loan is an incredible opportunity. You can build a self-storage with 1/3 the income, as if you went to a traditional bank, because the SBA will also loan you the carrying costs, the interest and on the loan, and the expenses, your staff. So until you break even, and that's included in that 1.5 million that I mentioned as an investment. So there's never been an opportunity. The bad news about SBA is you can only do one. They have a credit limit. So, the 7A is 5 million, and the 504, I think, is 10 million. So there's a limit on how much you can borrow. And that's the bad news. Otherwise, people would do 2, 3, 4 of them with the SBA, but you can only do one at a time because you can't go over their borrowing limits. So it's a great opportunity. Well, a lot of people, don't have self-storage experience. They don't have construction experience. They don't have design experience. And because they don't have the experience, they think it's too risky. Self-storage does require knowledge across multiple disciplines: real estate, design, construction, operations, finance, sales, and marketing. Very few people possess all these expertise at the onset. When we find a franchise, usually they got maybe experience with one, maybe two, but never 3 or 4 of them. So that's what being a franchise is all about. Franchising is the #1 business system in the United States. More businesses are done via a franchise because it gives people the opportunity to be ready to go day one. And this reduces the risk significantly when you attempt to navigate development alone. And in this case, we don't charge extra for the land development navigation. It's free. Because we felt that was the most important thing. And we had those skills to make our facilities different. We make them a sales and marketing entity, where most of the other ones, they just have a clerk in there taking orders. So it's a different type of business when you're in a franchise, especially ours, where we talk about, being the Ritz versus being Motel 6. So you have to rely on a team, and once you've got a team behind you, that perceived high risk drops significantly. It never drops to zero. When I built my first self-storage, yes, I had to take that first leap and believe. And, but after you do your first one, it's a lot easier for the second and third one. I own three now. Actually, my wife owns one and I own two, to be politically correct. She wanted to make some of the decisions, so I said, you can make them all. So, it is risky, and any business is risky, but one step at a time, knowing the steps and having that experience makes it so much easier. There's never been a better time because the data is out there on the land, the data is out there on the competition, the data is out there on the, where rental rates are going, where population are going. If you use this data, it makes it much easier to search out and find a good location.
Yeah, even speaking to that, Mark, even with our owners, I know, it's all about avoiding those landmines, but the ones that, got through construction, the amount of money that we save them, anywhere between $400,000 and $500,000 just on, cost overruns or not having enough attention to detail of that construction contract. And, if it's defined in that construction contract, it's just everybody knows who's paying for what type of product we're looking for. If you leave that open, next thing you know, you got tremendous cost overruns because you assume. So you got to have, like Mark said, the right team, put together so you can move efficiently and avoid those landmines. Before we jump into the next one, Mark, I just want to make note to a couple comments. John mentioned too many people selling self-storage startup help and no good way to compare them. I agree with you, John. There's a lot out there of, you don't know if it's, good books or somebody's just trying to make a dollar off you. So, you definitely want to partner up with somebody who's vested in your interest to succeed. And Kevin mentioned SBA is great for getting started, but the prepayment penalties they significantly limit the options. I can weigh in on that unless you want to speak to that, Mark.
Well, yes, SBA with prepayment options. Most people don't keep an SBA loan longer than 3 years. They actually transition out of them, because transitioning out of them actually gets some of that money back in your pocket. You refinance with another bank and you put some of that money in your bank. And usually at 3 or 4 years, you can refinance and take out $1 million or $2 or $3 million. So we do finance out of that. Self-storage is about cash flow. And when you look at your SBA loan, there are multiple types of SBA loans with different types of payouts or early penalties. So you can negotiate some of those things, and we certainly help our franchisees do that. But even with that, even if you have to pay $50,000 to get out of your loan, or even more, it's about cash flow. Usually the cash flow becomes better even when we refinance out of SBA loan. There's a lot of pros and cons, and we can show you that with an SBA loan. But unless you've got, 4 million, $5 million, you're not going to build a self-storage with a traditional bank. These banks are kind of tough, 35% down, and you've got to have the money for the carrying costs. So yes, there's pros and cons of SBA loan that you do need to look into. What was the first one again, Garrett?
The first one was just mentioning how much self-storage information is out there, startup courses, attend my course, books, whatnot, and it's overwhelming in how you compare them.
Yeah, you don't compare them. You read 6 or 7 of those books. You go to 3 or 4 of those classes, and that's what Scott House did before he came to me, because he said, the only place that's out there that's real is to fork over your money to them, and you're the silent partner, and that's certainly one way to go. But the big money is being that owner. If you go to our website, storageauthorityfranchise.com, right in the middle of that first page, it says learn more about development. Okay, go through there and you will see the chapters of our development guidance book. And the difference is with us, we're with you from day one, we have weekly meetings, bi-weekly meetings, whatever it takes, to answer what's in that guidance book, what's not in that book. So there's very few people out there that are going to take you through the development process. In fact, I've seen very few that take you through that and the whole process. So yes, you just got to look into it. Just try not to pay some big bucks for a class, because in the end, you're going to have to go out there and do it on your own.
Agreed.
Hopefully, yeah.
So our last reason, the one I hear the most in emails or talking to potential owners and viewing our poll here. I'm not sure if everybody can see it. The biggest hurdle, 100%, finding the right piece of land. So I'll transition that into you, Mark, because I know we get that a lot.
Yeah, and so this is kind of our last one. I'm not saying it's the least important. It can be the most important, but finding suitable land seems too difficult or expensive. So I've added or expensive. People don't even bring this up, so I do want to talk about it. But it seems too difficult. Securing the right site is one of the biggest barriers to entry. Many suitable parcels are never publicly listed, and they are found through direct outreach, site reviews, and local relationships. Um, this process takes time and persistence, which discourages many would-be developers before they begin. Others choose to work with specialists who identify and entitle land. While this increases the upfront costs, it can significantly reduce the uncertainty in development timelines. Um, that was from my notes. Now let me get right into it. Finding that land is going to be impossible for most people because they've got a mindset, I hire a real estate agent. We find land 7 different ways. Finding a real estate agent is one, and we find the least amount of land from a real estate agent. So if you're looking through the multiple listing right now, that's almost the same as using a real estate agent. It's not going to happen. Maybe 1 out of 10 of our franchisees find land through the multiple listings or through a franchise, or through a real estate broker. And I'll give you some ideas. What we do is day one, in our system, we help you call 50 real estate brokers in your area. Tell them what you're looking for. They all just say, no, I really don't have anything like that. But you've got their name to put to your email list to remind them, and they've got your name. So if they ever come across something offline, they're going to call you, before it hits the open market. And that's why we don't go to one agent. We go to 50 and call them all and tell them what we're doing. The second, the high for me, the number one way we found land was word of mouth with a boost. I mean, I go visit the town I'm working in, tell them about my project, even before I have a project. Now they've got my name, and I've done 2 or 3 facilities where the town has called us and said, "Hey, I found a piece of land for you." You know, at the beginning, I would go to a family outing, and all I would do is talk self-storage. Well, my wife cut that out, but now I don't bring it up, and everybody in the family brings it up. It's just the opposite because they've seen it be successful. So word of mouth is probably 50% of our land finds, and the other 50% really comes from um, traveling the roads. I just put a blog out that said, instead of going to that same grocery store, you probably got, where I live, I got 10 grocery stores. Go to a different grocery store every single week. So you drive down a different set of roads. We had one franchisee who was driving down the road, and he noticed a piece of plywood 4x8 on the ground. Well, sure enough, he lifted it up, and it was 25 acres for sale. He called it up. He was so excited. The guy wanted 1.2 million. He said he was willing to take 1.1 million. When I looked at the land with him, we found out, that all of it but 6 acres was wetlands, so you could only use 6 acres. But you know what? That's all we needed. And so he built an incredible facility. just by driving the roads. And now we have apps that we can draw circles around move them all around. And it'll tell you what the density of existing self-storage compared to the people are, what the rental rates are. So not only can we drive around, we can decide where to drive in advance. So instead of looking into our community, what used to take us time to look into our one community, in the same time, we can look at the 8 abutting communities within a half an hour and find land. So it takes work. We have the expertise, and it's a matter of, do you want to join somebody with the expertise, or do you want to take some of those classes? But like I said, go to our website, Storage Authority Franchise, right in the middle. It'll say learn more about development, and click on that. You're not going to find anybody that's going to have that kind of development expertise. I'm a civil engineer, and that's what I did for a living. I designed self-storages, Walmarts, Dunkin' Donuts, residential subdivisions. Probably made tons and tons, not probably, I made tons and tons of millionaires by helping them to get their design projects through. Um, and we did a webinar, and you can ask Garrett for it later. We did a webinar not too long ago about 6 or 7 of our franchisees and the land they found. This was land that was passed up by other people because they didn't have the imagination and the wherewithal to figure out how to make that site work. And it's quite interesting on, 6 locations where they were passed up by other people, and we turned them into great locations. So, it takes that partnership, but finding land, it's just hard enough. And I'm glad it's hard. It's just hard enough. So everyone won't do it. But the good news is, you don't have to accept a bad piece of land. There's plenty of good ones out there. And like I said, the data's out there. You just need somebody to help you interpret that data. And nobody uses the engineering background, because it's not just the data, but the wetlands, the topography, the cut and fills of a site. A lot of that we can find out early on because of our background in development. So there you go, Garrett. Those are the 7 things. If you can't overcome them in your mind, you're better off not doing self-storage. You're better off buying CubeSmart on the stock market. They've obviously done well, all the REITs, but it's just not the same, because owning one self-storage can turn into a lifestyle business where you're down to that 4-hour work week. And for most people, you're making double and triple what you did with your regular job. So I'm excited about it. I couldn't be more excited than right now. It's kind of like the stock market. People are going to keep buying, and at the top right now, and they're going to sell at the bottom. People don't make last year's income, even if the stock market went up 20%, because they'll do what they've done over and over. Self-storage and real estate is going to go up in value year after year. They're not building more land. So that's why we like the combination of the two.
Yeah, just chiming in on the whole the land perspective, Mark. I know especially for our owners, the low hanging fruit is the Crexy, CoStar, the MLS. But we have the software and the apps where we can kind of reverse engineer where to look, but it's not going to tell you the land that's for sale. So you got to have a good ground game. Everybody's looking at it digitally. Of course, you use the desktop studies as well, but you really got to get out there, and if you're going to find it offline, you got to be persistent, and that's where I think a lot of our owners win by just staying the course and doing what most don't want to do. They just want to sit on their desk and find land, or have a realtor find it for them. If you want to pay retail prices, that's the way to do it. If you really want to save quite a bit of money, you got to have that good ground game, like Mark mentioned.
Right. And what you said is, because we don't use the MLS, we find land a lot cheaper. One, I did not go into that. People find it too expensive. the reason I say people find it too expensive is finding land yourself is one way. Another way is buying a piece of land that's already been found by somebody else. Um, and that piece of land, they add 500,000 if they find it and do a conceptual. If they bring it through planning and zoning, they add between a million to probably $2 million to the price of the land if they've got it approved. So it does become expensive if you let somebody else find it. There's actually people out there that will go and look for land for you, but and they know you're going to buy it at the onset, but that costs $500,000. I mean, we have a couple of franchisees that literally don't have time. They're working 7 or 8 hours, 7 or 8 hours, but they're working 8 hours 7 days a week at their careers. So Storage Authority does have a second program where we actually find the land. If you want to learn more about that, send me an email, Marc, M-A-R-C, at storageauthority.com, and I can tell you about that. So there's a lot of different options out there when it comes to finding land.
All right, I'm gonna get into Q&A here. I do want to open up one last poll. We'll go ahead and address that as we're getting into the Q&A. Appreciate you sharing that, Marc. That 7 powerful reality checks. It goes to show self-storage development. It's not a passive investment in the beginning, nor is it a shortcut to wealth. So you got to have the patience. You got to be prepared. You gotta execute. And it's also what kind of pushes a lot of individuals that want to do self-storage out, because they don't want to stay the course. But for those willing to address those realities directly, self-storage remains one of the most durable, profitable real estate businesses available today. Before we get into the Q&A, I want to make sure everybody knows where to find Marc. Obviously, storageauthorityfranchise.com. Great tips there, blogs that I definitely recommend you subscribe to. You can email him you mentioned Marc, M-A-R-C, at storageauthority.com. Any questions? And we're going to be doing this open format here. We try to do it 25, 30 minutes, so it's just a quick hit, highlights and good information for our audience. So if anybody has suggestions of vendors or contractors or somebody you want to bring on. I know a while back we brought on some of the lenders, but feel free to put that in the chat as well, and we'll make sure we get that on the docket moving forward. And with that, I'll go ahead and open it up to Q&A. Appreciate it. I will say I did see a couple coming in, so I'm gonna kind of backpedal and get to them as they came in. Andre is talking, when talking about rental rates, what metrics or ratios important?
Well, rental rates are one of the key aspects of your P&L. And it's one of the things that to some degree you get to control. Sometimes it's easier to increase the rent 10 cents a square foot, and the most profitable thing to do in the world. And that's why when you look behind Garrett, we have a candy and coffee bar and water bar, because when people feel and become friends, the instant they walk into your self-storage door, you can charge 10% more. They're happy paying more because they know they're getting more. They know it's not a clerk in there. They know it's somebody that's providing superior over-the-top service. So, in this day and age, right now, today, with today's costs, and the cost of self-storage has come down over the last 2 years. We had a high peak because of steel and a bunch of other things, but that's dropped down over the last 2 years. So, with today's costs and everything, you want to rent your facility out at $1.65, $1.60 a square foot or more. So I'm not saying the competition has to be at that level, because we charge 30% more than the competition. And you got to be careful when you look at the competition rates. It's not the REITs rate online that says, hey, here's a 10 by 10 for $65. That would mean, 65 cents a square foot, because 10 by 10 is the average site. I did that when my house was hit by the flood here in Florida. It was $65 a month. 2 months later, it was 135, and 10 months after I moved in, it was 209. So it's very tricky now to find out what the competition rates are. I mean, you literally have to call them and ask them, how long is this rate good for? And if they won't answer you, it's going to be increased up to double 2 to 3 months down the line. So it is a key, and there's programs out there now that actually show you the history, where the trend is going. Self-storage construction has declined over the last couple of years, which is good for all of us, whether you own or are building, because rental rates are starting to go up with more homes being built, and more businesses being built. So it's a great future. The other thing we look at is population moving to town, because that's going to drive the prices up as well. So we look at a lot of metrics: square foot per person, existing rental rates, what we believe the market is happening in the future, and what we can do to be better than the competition. But you're looking for areas where you believe you can charge, a $1.60 for a 10 by 10. And you can do that in a lot of areas, but you might not be able to do that in North Dakota, or you might find they're at $2 a square foot at North Dakota. You've got to go and look at individual towns and figure this out. And you got to look at short-term and long-term rental rates. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but it's an important aspect of it, and one of the things that we review in detail in the very beginning.
Yeah, and just to piggyback that, Andre, we definitely don't build any P&Ls off of web rates. Those are, essentially teaser rates, like Mark mentioned, move in at 65, a couple months later, 132, then 209. Some of the REITs are dealing with some pretty hefty lawsuits over, they're calling it a bait and switch. So we'll see how that unfolds. I'm big on let us regulate our own industry, but, because of this teaser rate strategy the REITs deployed, it's definitely convoluted the whole space. So we'll see how that unfolds. Kevin from the chat, he asked, is it a good time to do big box retail conversions?
Yes, it's always actually a great time to do big box conversion projects. Everything depends on the price. You still got to look at the same factors. Is there a demand? Is the rental rates? A big box allows you to get to the finish line faster, because it's not going to take as much design time. Usually it doesn't take as much approval time. So conversions are good. We've got one going on right now in Detroit, Michigan. It's for converting an old furniture store. And you don't even need to get a huge big box. Everybody's always thinking about Walmart at 90,000 square feet. You might get something that's 30 or 40,000 square feet, but it's got such a huge parking lot that the parking lot can be turned into non-climate control self-storage in the future. But we look at conversions, we look at value added of existing sites, we look at land next door to existing sites to make them larger, and we look at new construction as well. But new construction and big box conversions, that's where you're going to make the highest profits.
So Lisa asks, what if I'm not interested in starting a facility from scratch? I prefer to purchase an existing location to start and then potentially build my own. What should I look out for to be concerned when looking for these options?
If you're looking to buy a facility, you've got to look at everything you look at for a new piece of land, because you've got to hire a third party person to review their P&L. Their P&Ls are slanted towards what's going to happen next year after you increase the rental rates, after you do this. So you've got to be realistic that you should buy it on what their rental rates are. To say that you can raise them and they can't, you better have a very good reason for that. You've got to look clearly at the condition of that facility. It's called CapEx. When I buy it, how much money do I have to put into it to get it up to snuff? If it's got no fencing, no gate, no pavement, your rental rates are going to be low. But on the other hand, you go to put that in a facility, it could be 50,000 or it could be $300,000 to bring that facility up to today's standards. So we use what's called a cap rate, and that tells you when you're looking at these, they're going to give you a cap rate, and that's how much profit you're going to make on the facility if you don't take a loan out. So these guys are selling at 5 cap rates. So you might make that means you're going to make a 5% profit. So you might make a 5% profit your first year, more likely your second year. So you just got to be realistic about, you're starting at a lower profit, where when you build, you make profit multiple times that. It's not a bad thing to go out there and make 5% profit, because next year you'll make 6%. You can add 2 to 3% to your rental rates every year, so your profitability will go up by 1 to 2% automatically, because we don't have high expenses in the self-storage business like you do in the restaurant business or any business that has a lot of employees or products that have to be moved that go up with inflation. So there's a host of things. If you email Garrett, our manual has a section on that. He'll cut and paste and send it to you.
And my email is Garrett, Garrett at storageauthority.com. Modestus in the chat, he asked, what's the time frame from finding land to completing development, starting operations? Just an estimate he's looking for.
Yeah, I'll give you an estimate. And so you found the land, you're all set there. To design it, again, with somebody helping you and not taking forever, it takes 2 to 4 months to design it, 2 to 4 months to get it approved. And if it's a large project, it takes about a year to build. So, that's a year and a half, if you're on it, to get through to your doors open. If you take the slow route, as many people do because they have a job, it can take 2 years from the day you find land to opening that facility, because it takes a year to build a big facility. If you're building it in 2 phases, it might only take you 6 to 8 months.
Let's see. John asks, your thoughts on near future of premium climate control in rural 4-season America?
Well, your climate control versus non-climate control is not standard anywhere in the US. You got to look at the competition, the difference in the pricing at the competition level, and you got to look at the difference in the amount of climate control and non-climate control in your market. There's a little bit of science and art to it, but it's not arbitrary. You got to have an expert look at that. If everything is climate control, and sometimes you find that in Florida, because they did multi-stories on smaller pieces of land. The non-climate control, which costs less to build, rents more than the climate control, because there's so little of it in the area and people just like to drive up to their doors. So, we start off with a theory. It should be 50-50. And sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. The problem is when you build these multi-stories, the vast majority is climate control. And we have that advantage because most of the time we find 5 or 6 acres and we build single story because it costs less to build and it rents more. Every floor you go up in a multi-story, it rents for less. So it's even harder to figure out what the rental rates are for multi-story.
Yeah. Looks like our questions are coming to an end. So go ahead, and if you do have any more questions, put them in the chat. But we got another one from Andre. So what emerging markets are yielding $1.60 a square foot?
Well, three quarters of the United States is. Three quarters of the United States. But that's not to say all of Florida is. That's not to say all of Connecticut is. But three quarters of the state, we see that. And we're not even talking, New York City or Miami or some of these big cities. They're at $5 and $6 a square foot. The like I said, the one in Detroit, Michigan, you might think that it wouldn't be at $1.60 a square foot, but there's little competition in the 3 mile radius. We had to go to the 4 mile radius, 5 mile radius, and they're charging over $1.60 a square foot. And we are always the premier leader in the facility once the grand opening month specials are done. So there's a lot of places, but those apps like storetrack.com, they give you all that data. So right off the bat, you've got that data. They charge a monthly fee. Garrett, that email is storetrack.com, right?
Yeah, you can go to their website, storetrack.com, and like I mentioned earlier, that's probably the number one leaders when it comes to data, looking square foot per capita or just any information, rates, anything you need.
When somebody first comes to us, we have a discovery process. Before we go into that discovery process, we ask them where they live and confirm that's where they want to build self-storage. We've had some people up north say, I want to build in Florida because as soon as it's built, I'm moving there. And we actually got one starting construction next week where the gentleman moved from Florida he moved from New England to Florida, built a house here. He got ahead of himself. Storage is not done, so he has to fly north a couple of times a month for his business. So now I got sidetracked with that story, Garrett. What was the question again?
Andre was just asking. I think you covered it. Just emerging markets that are yielding the $1.60.
Oh yeah, yep. So again, self-storage is a 3 mile radius. People don't drive more than 3 miles. Now, if you're super rural, if you're under 15,000 people, in town, it might be a 5 or 10 mile driving distance. But if it's 5 miles to the next self-storage, their rates almost don't count. You get to set the rates in that 5 mile territory. People just don't want to drive. People don't even believe this, but it's the truth. And it's not what it was in the 80s. But right now, people over 90% rent at the very first self-storage they stop at. They don't want to check out 3 or 4 self-storages anymore. So your self-storage has to look excellent online. It has to look excellent on the drive-by. It has to look excellent as a drive-in, and your manager needs to open that door for them. The manager needs to be in front of the counter. A lot of secrets have to be done. So you're the first person they stop at. You need a good Instagram, Facebook posts, because if they stop, it's not going to be the rent. They're going to rent their prices fourth down on the list. So we just got to get them in the door. So I know what I was saying. People that come to chat with us before we do a long application and a couple hours of discovery, we ask them, where do you live? Is that where you want to build? And Garrett and I do a quick review to make sure that area or somewhere close has the rental rates. If they're renting a 10 by 10 for $90, you can't build in that area. Here's a secret. The rates you want to use is achievable rates. Okay. And the one place that has the closest online rental rates to achievable is U-Haul. So U-Haul will be charging $1.60. The guys over here at Public Storage will be charging 65. Use the $1.60. That's the reality. Because U-Haul, for whatever reason, they decided not to be like one of the big REITs and go the teaser rates. That maybe they didn't want to get sued. So achievable rates, the closest you're going to find is at U-Haul. So don't use the other guy's online rates. You've got to figure out achievable rates in your territory. So don't tell U-Haul I promoted them.
Another question came in, Mark, from Jafer. Can you please provide some feedback on city/county approvals? What to look out for? Is it hard to get permissions for storage these days?
I've never had a self-storage denied in my life. What I've had denied is zone changes. So we tell all of our franchisees, hey, if you can get a zone change, yeah, great. But only 20% of zones change requests get approved. So we start by looking what's available in the zone that allows self-storage. Now, if it's touching the zone that allows it, it's much easier to get approval from that zone change. But planning and zoning, you've got to be prepared. I remember Kamal in New Jersey, when his facility was going through planning and zoning, they opened a Facebook page against him, and it had like 600 views. I said, it's not a problem. It's not a problem, Kamal. I mean, we met with the staff multiple times. We got everything right. That was the one with the 25 acres. The 20 acres we didn't use, we put it in a permanent conservation easement. We were in a industrial area. The road was industrial. It was the neighbors to the rear of us. We did the diagrams to show that they were over 1,500 feet away. We did the diagrams to show there would be no noise. We did the diagrams that if they put a gas station or any other retail use, it would have more of a detrimental impact. It would have more of a negative financial impact. At the end of that hearing, all the people that were against it came up and shook his hand. The mayor shook his hand. The mayor came and did an interview with him in the news. It's just planning. All of our franchisees, we have a list of, okay, here's all the questions for the wetlands agent. Here's all the questions for the planning and zoning. And we have a list. This is everything you need to bring to planning and zoning. And why? Bring this lease analysis that shows, we have access to their units. We can bust them open. We have cameras where we can see everything. If somebody wanted to put a contamination in a self-storage unit, they're not going to do it. They're going to dump it down the road. So we show them how we are different than their old mindset of self-storage, and how we're going to be part of that community. And we actually work on becoming part of the community early on, well before we go to planning and zoning. But there are tricks of the trade, and we don't see it as a problem, because self-storages, if you haven't noticed, are pretty nice looking buildings nowadays, and they're the highest taxpayers per square foot of building in town. So self-storages typically are a win-win, and they create the least amount of traffic in the area. So there's a lot of positive things. You just gotta show that. And we with our system, that $1.60, that includes the little bit of extra money to put in nice fencing, to put in nice landscaping. But yes, you got to do a good job.
All right. So Lisa in our chat, and I said, it's best to set up a quick intro call, but she was just asking the advantages of purchasing a franchise with us versus opposed to like other companies. And I mentioned, a message, or it's best to set up a quick intro call, and we're always big fans, exhaust all avenues and go with who's going to support you the most, and your success is part of that equation. I don't know if you have anything to add, Mark.
Well, absolutely, I do. Absolutely. There is no comparison, and and it's either do it on your own, which I don't recommend, do it with us, or do it with a management company. Um, there's an advantage of a management company. They do everything. Once you're open, they do everything. They decide your rental rates, they decide everything, and they mail you a check at the end of every month. But you did absolutely nothing. Their 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 costs are about 18% a month, a lot more than ours, triple ours, and their rental rates are significantly less than ours, 50% less than ours often, because they have a different management style. The manager in our facilities is the highest common denominator. In their facilities, it's the lowest common denominator. So, but if you don't have time, you go with a management company, you'll make less money, but you won't spend one time. If you try to build something and you enjoy building something, saying, I did that, we're the team to go with, because it's not just the value of us. We recognize there's a value to you. You're going to be the local face of your business. You own that self storage, and you're going to care more about your business than anybody else. You'll get a second quote for that lawnmower guy, and you'll save $200 a week or a month, whatever it is. the the REITs, they're going to hire the same guy that costs a lot more, because it's easier for them. So you go, you make the phone calls, but it's typically us or a management company, or on your own. Um, and there's really no good people that are looking out for you during the development phase. You know, there's contractors, they'll do design build with you. It's a great way to go, but you're not going to end up with that coffee bar. You're not going to end up with that sign above your coffee bar that says, hey, welcome. May all those that enter as guests leave as friends. You're not going to end up with a sales and marketing office. And I'm willing to bet dollars to donuts, if somebody sat with me and compared our office to their office. We have a vestibule that's going to have a kiosk in there, because we know when the manager doesn't show up for work or gets sick for a week, you don't want to go to work. People can still rent and pay their bill in that vestibule, with a kiosk. I get it. They can do it on their phone, but the whole population is not ready to do everything on their phone. So it's not easy. Ask them if they own any self storages. Ask them how long they've owned self storages. Um, because we've done in the trench. I stole Garrett away, from a very large company, because he built his team built a self storage, and Garrett and I were friends at this point. You know, Garrett, how many were you putting in a month? I hired you away about month 8. How many were you putting in a month at that facility?
We were probably ranging between like 60 and 85 a month, but rentals per month.
Right, per month. In 8 months, that facility was rented up. Normally, it takes, feasibility study says 2 or 3 years, but Garrett understood sales and marketing. He came to, I did a presentation for his company. They had like 30 employees, and I did 2 or 3 presentations to his company on sales and marketing. Um, Out of all those 30 employees, and I gave them all my card. Hey, call me, any questions? You want to meet up for coffee? Garrett called me every 6 months. We met for coffee every 6 months. So those are the kind of people you're going to have with storage of people, with storage authority, people from the trenches that have done it. And it's their livelihood. And in my case, it's my retirement. But it's a tough decision. I can see that. But the franchising provides that system that provides the benefits that most people can't get on their own.
Yeah, that's a good transition, Mark, into, we're getting to the top of the hour. Our next webinar, same date next month, on the 19th, we're actually covering hospitality in self storage. We self storage is the backbone of our business, but you treat it like hospitality and retail. And that's how you become the price leader. That's how you become the hometown self-storage. So we're covering hospitality and design and sales and marketing and operations. So be on the lookout for that, and go ahead and sign up for that. But going to that very topic of hospitality, you have 20 minutes with your customers to make a customer for life. They walk in, they see the coffee bar, they see the free Wi-Fi, and the manager walking behind the desk with their clipboard. They know you care. They know that this is where I want to rent, and they actually become your multi-level marketers out in the community, because when somebody says, "Hey, do I need self-storage?" Well, I can tell they really cared at Storage Authority. And that's really what it's about. If you just sit back as an order taker and treat yourself as a commodity, be prepared to compete on price. And that's just, not what we're about. We want to make a difference in the community, and we definitely want to treat every customer that walks through our doors like $1 million. And that definitely, exponentially increases your bottom right and your revenues. So that being said, it looks like the questions have come to an end. We appreciate everybody who's still with us with the Q&As. Marc, any closing statements?
Nope. You've got our emails. You have any questions, even if you're not going to become a franchise of Storage Authority, we're here to help. You're welcome to contact us. Before you get in trouble or after you get in trouble, we'll put you in the right direction.
Sounds good. Appreciate everybody joining. We'll see you on the next one.
Peace out.